So Professor Sakot, thank you very much for coming to my FBK interview. We know that you have published a lot of books, and one of them is the 4 colors of a business growth. So what are these 4 colors?
So the 4 colors of business growth is a book that is based on a framework that was developed when I was at the University of Michigan.
Okay.
And I was working with some of my colleagues in organizational behavior and in innovation. And the framework was initially developed to understand leadership and culture in organizations. And then when we were working together, we expanded the framework to deal with issues of business growth.
Yeah.
And so I'd been teaching and consulting on these topics for a number of years.
Yeah.
And then decided to write a book that would be easily accessible.
To whom?
To business leaders and managers.
Yeah.
Something that was not overly technical, that was easy to read,
Yeah.
but at the same time easy to implement
Yeah.
in organizations. The 4 colors basically represent 4 different quadrants,
Okay.
which are essentially 4 different ways in which organizations create value.
Okay.
Okay? And one of the ways in which, one of the colors is yellow. And so one of the ways in which organizations create value is by collaborating,
Yeah.
building stronger cultures, stronger communities, improving employee harmony, retention, morale, developing leadership capabilities within their employees. So we call this collaborate.
Yeah.
And we give it the color yellow.
Yeah.
Another way in which organizations create value is by using better and more efficient processes. So things like Six Sigma, total quality management, Lean Sigma, better manufacturing processes, better risk management processes, better planning processes. All of these things are part of what we call control.
Yeah.
And we gave it the color red.
Red. Okay.
So both control and collaborate deal with what is internal to the organization,
Yeah.
people and processes. 2 ways in which organizations create value. The third way in which organizations create value is what we call compete, and we gave it the color blue. And these are all the things that organizations do to create value by becoming more competitive in the marketplace, improving customer satisfaction,
Yeah.
having better relationships and joint ventures, alliances, mergers, acquisitions, divestitures. So this is the quadrant that deals with the customers, markets, and opportunities of today.
Yeah.
And the final way in which organizations create value is what we call create. We gave the color green. And these are all the things that organizations do from an innovation standpoint to create new products, new services, new markets. So things like, what Google is doing with new products and services, or what Apple does with new products, or what biotech firms do when they come up with new drugs. So this all falls under what we call create. It has a green color. So these are sort of 4 categories of value creation activities that organizations engage in.
But what's the core message do you want to deliver?
The core message of this framework is that the diagonally opposite quadrants pull the organization in opposite directions. That means they are competing forms of creating value. So red and green are diagonally opposite, which means that if you're focused on efficiency and risk management and cost productivity and processes, it's going to be very difficult for you to also engage in innovation.
Yeah.
And if you're engaged in innovation, you're not going to be as efficient as you would be if you were focused on red. By the same token, yellow and blue are diagonally opposite quadrants that pull the organization in opposite directions. They're competing forms of value creation. So an organization that focuses on culture, people, and leadership development is going to find it, and teamwork and cooperation, is going to find it challenging to also be extremely competitive.
Yeah.
If you're extremely competitive, then developing these collaborative, cooperative relationships within the organization is going to be challenging. So these are tensions that organizations face. And the message of the framework is that if you're going to adopt any growth strategy, you better understand what the color what that strategy is, and therefore the tensions that this will create.
Only opposite part of it.
The opposite diagonally, opposite quadrant. And if you can anticipate the tensions, you can cope with them more effectively.
Yeah. So how can business leaders and executives formulate a business strategy which is effective to maximize the value of an organization?
So what I talk about in the Four Colors of Growth book is that it all begins with an identification of the organization's core competencies. Right?
Core competencies, okay.
Core competence is a capability that the organization has, which is stronger than what its competitors have.
Yeah.
So it's something that gives you a competitive advantage,
Yeah.
either on the customer side or on the cost side, over your competitors. Okay, it can come from your culture, it can come from your processes, it can come from technology, it can come from knowledge. So it's a combination of many different things. Once you identify your core competence, then you have to determine what's the key value driver. What business can I maximize the impact of this core competence in? And once you have that, then you can formulate a strategy. So one of the cases, for example, to illustrate this point, that I do with my students in the executive MBA class here in Fudan is the Walt Disney case. Now, Walt Disney's core competence is creativity.
Creativity.
They're very creative, right? They're better at it than most of their competitors. Now, for them, that creativity is manifested in one very important value driver, and that is making films. Film is a value driver. More specifically, animated movies, where they create characters and so on and so forth. And so their strategy is really focused on making films, making enough films so that they can get a blockbuster or two in a given year, which maximizes market share. And then out of that, all of their supporting businesses are able to grow. So if films are successful, they can create characters that they put on consumer products like sweatshirts and t-shirts and bags. They sell those. They can create themes in their theme parks that increases theme park attendance. Everything is based off of film. So the way that you create value is you identify a core competence, which can be any of the four colors.
This is the very first step.
This is the very first
You understand who you are, right?
Understand who you are. It requires deep introspection. What I find when I work with companies is that this is not easy, right? Because it takes a lot of effort, a lot of discussion, a lot of thought. Once you know that, know what the value driver is, then craft a simple strategy to drive revenue growth through that value driver. And then understand that your strategy is going to have a certain color. It's going to be blue, it's going to be red, it's going to be green. And that is going to help you to understand the tensions within the organization that you have to manage so that you can execute the growth strategy effectively.
So after they have formulated a suitable business strategy, how can they, to implement these strategies?
The implementation of the strategy requires attending to three things. One is you have to make sure that the resource allocation supports the strategy.
Okay.
So in the case of Disney that I gave you, when Michael Eisner took over Disney in 1984, he said, my strategy is focused on film. And we're making only 4 movies a year. I want to make 16 movies next year. Okay? Which means that we're going to allocate a lot of our resources to making movies. So your resource allocation, capital, people, has to support the execution of the strategy. If there's a disconnect, then the strategy becomes meaningless. Right? The next thing you have to do is come up with the right performance metrics. How am I going to measure my business units? How am I going to measure the success of the strategy? How will I judge people? Right? And Eisner, when he implemented the strategy for Disney, said, we're going to focus on 2 performance metrics. We're going to grow at 20% per year, our top line. And we're going to have return on net assets, a financial measure, of 20% every year. So once, and I'm always a big fan of having a few metrics, not too many. Keep it simple, right? And then tell people they have to meet those targets defined by those metrics. And the third thing is your people and your organization culture. you need to have the right kind of people in the right places to execute the strategy. And you need an organization culture that is aligned with the execution of the strategy.
Yeah.
So if you have a blue strategy, you better have a culture that supports an aggressive blue strategy. You better have people who are good blues.
Yeah.
Right? If you have a red strategy, then you need the right kind of culture that's focused on execution, that pays attention to detail, that's focused on cost. You need to have people who think like that.
Yeah.
You have a green strategy, you need a lot of creative people. So every strategy has a color, and then the people in organization culture have to support that strategy.
Do we have a perfect strategy for all the organizations? Do we have a perfect one?
No, what I find is that the successful organizations have effective strategies. And they're consistent. They don't keep changing their strategy every 2 years. They have a strategy for the long term. They execute the strategy. They develop a strong culture that supports the execution of the strategy. And then they stick with it. Now, if market conditions change, they have sufficient flexibility that they adapt the strategy to suit the shift in the conditions of the market. But a lot of organizations don't have effective strategies. So it's more the successful ones that tend to have effective strategies.
Yeah. And you are one of the faculty members for our joint Washington University and Fudan University EMB programs. So from the perspective of your 4 colors of business growth, what colors are Chinese students good at, and what colors do they need to have most now?
So what I find is, now, I don't want to overgeneralize because every class has a pretty good diversity of students, and I see students in my classes who are in all 4 quadrants. Right? Some are very yellow, you can see it because they're good at working with people, they're good in teams. I guess some students are very good red, they're very good technically, right? They pay attention to details. There's some students who are very aggressive, they're very competitive, right? And there's some students who are very creative. So I see all 4 colors. I think if I were to say, when I look at China, when I look at the businesses in China and the growth pattern that many of these firms have gone through, I think the quadrant in which Chinese companies and many of the leaders I've seen have excelled is red.
Red.
Right? They've been, they've had a lot of focus on manufacturing, a lot of focus on cost, a lot of focus on productivity. And I think that China has become very good in some of the things that you have to do in red to become competitive and to become more productive. So I see that in China, I see that in a lot of the students that I see here. And also I think increasingly in blue, although I think that is part of the evolution, right? As Chinese companies become more global, as they see acquisitions outside of China, they're now playing in global markets, which means that issues of developing global brand, appealing to global customers who want more than just cost productivity. As you buy companies, as you expand into Africa, blue becomes more and more important, right? The phase that China hasn't yet fully come to grips with, but where they're getting stronger, is the green.
Green.
Right? Which is, the traditional strength of the U.S. has really been in green. Now the U.S. has been strong in a lot of other quadrants too. We were, Ford was the first company, one of the first companies in the U.S. to go to the Ford assembly line, mass manufacturing, and so on. Since then, others like Toyota have become very good at red. But one of the competitive advantage that the U.S. has had over many other countries is because of our research and development and universities and all of that, it's been a very strong green. So you get a lot of new companies being launched, like Apple and Google and Facebook.
So the color of green is the most desired by our Chinese companies
and so I
and
think
business
that's
leaders.
the aspirational step, the next step in the evolution of these companies, as and it's sort of the way that economies and companies evolve, right? You start by focusing on cost, and you have cheap labor, and you've got manufacturing scale, you become good at that, you build the infrastructure, then you become more globally competitive, you expand, you acquire firms. And when you've achieved those two, then you begin to think about how do we encourage organic innovation.
Yeah, innovation.
Now, there are a lot of patents being filed in China, so obviously there's a lot of grassroots R&D being done.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
But I see that as sort of the next step in the evolution of the economy and in the evolution of the firms who are major players in China.
Okay, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.